Chapter 20. Difference of Opinion. I arrived at the club around the usual time, got searched by the security who knew me by then, but didn't seem to realise why or how I could always be there spending money. Perhaps they thought I was just another one of these rich boys out wasting their super rich father's cash. Whatever, it didn't matter. It was the last night I'd be seeing them, and what they thought of me was irrelevant, as long as they didn't catch me selling drugs, that is. But they'd been so far off the radar thus far that I hadn't been worried about them since the first week of our business venture. I walked into the main bar and saw Jason chatting to a colleague. I lingered in his line of vision in the background, and when he noticed me, I walked into the toilets and he followed. As always, we made the exchange under the partition of 2 cubicles and flushed the loos and washed our hands at the sinks. This was the moment he chose. "So, you spoken to Sarah today?" "Yeah," I said. "And what do you think?" I brought some of the cool water up to my face. It was always hot in Tricky Beach, even in the toilets, maybe even more so. "I don't want any part of it," I said, for some reason thinking a little honesty would convince Jason that it was unfair to push me into something that wasn't really any of my business. "Oh, you don't," he replied, that aggressive nature of his taking no time at all to rear its ugly head. "And you don't think that you owe her a little something for taking you in?" "I thought that's what the rent money was for," I replied, before turning my back on him to grab a paper towel and dab dry my face. I half expected the lunatic from down under to jump me from behind, maybe rip my head from my shoulders, but he didn't. "Funny," he said, rather calmly, bizarrely. "And you're happy that Amin is stealing her money?" "So she says," I responded, immediately regretting it. Disrespecting Sarah to Jason was like waving a red rag to a bull. "You calling her a liar?" he yelled, finger pointing at me and taking a step towards me. I held up my hands, gesturing for him to calm down. I was getting cocky, knowing that I was leaving soon and risked getting a kicking for upsetting the people that, in their own way and for whatever reasons, however selfish, had helped me when I needed it in the recent months. "Listen, Amin might be an arsehole, a bully even," I explained, "but he's played it straight with me from day one. He hasn't done a thing wrong to me, or you for that matter." "Oh, he will," said Jason, the anger in his voice making him sound desperate. Without Sarah keeping him cool, he could jump us at any time. It was strange that he said that, and maybe I should have realised then that I didn't fully appreciate the situation that I was in. In my eyes, I was on the home straight with my flight booked and my bag packed. I didn't envisage anything happening to thwart my plan of escape. "Well, with respect, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it," I said, then walked out of the men's room, leaving Jason shaking his head whilst drying his hands, disappointment, anger, rage plastered across his face. The club was packed and business was booming. Less than 3 hours into it and nearly all Charlie had gone. I was getting hungry and sipping on nothing but water all night was boring and tasteless, but I was determined to keep myself in check, stay sober and keep the promises I'd made to myself. This time tomorrow I'll be back in the UK, home, I thought, with a clear idea as to what is important in life. It was all going to plan, until another dribble of blood flowed from my nose and settled on my top lip. I made my way to the toilets, head facing down, not wanting people to see the blood. Holding tissue to my nose, I pulled out my phone and checked for any messages or missed calls as I stepped out of the toilet cubicle. Suddenly, I felt cornered, shadows came about me, and I looked up to see 4 Moroccans surrounding me. "We want money," said the North African, in pidgin English. "We want Charlie. We want cocaine." I knew they weren't requesting to buy drugs from me, and they weren't looking for a handout or donation of money so they could eat or feed their family. I was being mugged. I looked over the shoulder of one of the Moroccans and saw 2 European-looking fellas, feeling awkward, understanding the situation, but deciding to shuffle out of the men's room when gestured to do so by a couple of my aggressors. "I don't know what you're talking about, mate," I said. My hands went up, gesturing for calm once more. Could it work twice in a night? No. I'm not really sure what happened next, not exactly anyway, or for how long it lasted. I remember the first few punches, then falling down but being held up at the same time. My phone was knocked out of my hand, and I think I heard it slide off into one of the toilet cubicles, and then I remember being on the floor, getting kicked and stamped on, and finally waking up, cowering, behind a toilet. I didn't feel very good. I sat up, examined myself as best I could, stood, then hobbled to the sinks and looked in a mirror. My face was battered, with a bit of blood here and there, a couple of grazes and some red marks that would soon turn into full-blown bruises. I also had spit on my head and shirt, which disgusted me. So I wasted no time in getting water all over my skin to clean myself, then dabbing spit and blood from my clothes with a wet paper towel. Fucking arseholes, I thought. was only then that I realised that I'd been robbed as well. I found my wallet on the floor where I'd been knocked out, but that the cash had gone. Around 100 I think I had, and the last couple of bags of coke were gone from my pocket too. On the plus side, I found my phone on the floor, a couple of cubicles along, but it looked broken. I kept it. Maybe it could be repaired, maybe it couldn't. At that point my head still wasn't fully with it. Once the bleeding had stopped, after a final dab here and there with a fresh paper towel, I left the men's room and made my way to the bar. "Geez, mate, what happened to you?" asked Jason, surprise on his face. "You got some cash for a taxi home?" I asked. "Yeah, of course, man," he answered, looking round for his superiors before pulling out a few notes from his pocket and handing them over. "What happened?" he persisted. "I just got jumped by some Moroccans in a toilet," so I explained. "I think they knew I'd been serving up." "Shit, mate, what did they say?" I wasn't in the mood for talking about it. "Look, I gotta go. I'll see you at home," I said. I turned and walked towards the exit, through the crowd of people dancing and drinking, all of whom were so high, drunk or caught up in their own worlds that they didn't notice the state I was in. The security guards turned a blind eye as I walked past them and out of the club. It seemed like nobody wanted to know. I was happy to see some taxis waiting, as hanging around made me nervous. I didn't know where these guys who just mugged me were, but I knew I didn't want to run into them again. Although in all honesty, I'm not sure if I'd recognise them if they stood in front of me in broad daylight. I got in the taxi at the front of the queue. Marbella Centro, por favor. I tried my phone, but the screen was cracked and it didn't work. I shoved it back in my pocket and realised the driver of the taxi was banging on about something. Of course, my Spanish was still hopeless, but I think I got the occasional word and the general message was understood. English people are pieces of shit, always fighting like animals. No respect. He was happy I was hurt. All day I'd been dreaming of grabbing my bag and saying goodbye to Sarah's apartment, my home for the last few months. But right then, I just couldn't wait to get back there and out of this taxi. Back at Tricky Beach, the four Moroccans approached the bar. Jason picked up a bottle of water, pulled two €100 notes from his pocket and wrapped it around the plastic water bottle, then handed it over to the leader of the Moroccans and grinned. "Thanks, bro. You guys have a good night." Chapter 21. Change of Heart. I woke up to Jason shaking me by the shoulder. "Dude," he said, "looks like they did you in pretty good, mate." I slowly sat up and swung my legs around to put my feet on the floor. Sitting in my boxer shorts, I took a look at my body and arms and legs and noted that the bruises had come along quite nicely, dark blue and black like bruises should be. I could feel muscles aching as I picked up the box of painkillers from the bedside table and took out 2 tablets, chucked them into my mouth and washed them down with the last of the bottled water I had next to the bed. "How's my face?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not great, mate," he said. "How you feeling?" "Fucking fantastic," I replied, sarcastically of course. "Is Sarah home?" "I think so, yeah. You want me to take a look?" "Yeah, please. I couldn't find any plasters and stuff last night." "Plasters? Think you might need stitches, mate," he said, grinning as he headed off to Sarah's bedroom. I yawned and began to stretch but had to stop due to the pain. I took a good look at my face in the mirror, thought how butch it made me look, and put on a pair of jeans, grabbed a t-shirt and made my way to the front room. I slowly eased myself down onto a chair by the dining table as Jason appeared with a tired-looking Sarah following behind. "Oh, James, what happened?" she asked, visibly shocked by the sight of my battle wounds. "Who did this to you?" she continued. "I don't know." "He wants some plasters," said Jason to Sarah. "We need to get you to the hospital," she said to me. "Nah, it looks worse than it is. Please, Sarah, can you just clean the cuts for me and cover them maybe?" She had to tear herself away from staring at my face and then headed to the kitchen. She was back in moments with the first aid box that I spent half an hour looking for the night before it couldn't find. She knelt down beside me and began looking through the different bottles and boxes within the medical box. "You know who's behind this, don't you?" asked Jason, not to anyone in particular. "I've never seen them before," I said. "You said they were Moroccans, and they knew you were selling powder. How hard did they hit you on the head, Jimbo?" I winced at the pain. Sarah dabbed away at a cut above my eye with cotton wool that must have been drenched in surgical spirit or something similar. I didn't know what it was. I didn't even look. It seemed at my weakest point I trusted her to take care of me. Had I been too quick to decline the help she had asked of me? "Sorry," she said softly. "This is going to hurt." I stared into her beautiful eyes as she cleaned my wounds and covered them, showed nothing but tender, loving care as she did so. "So what do you want to do about it, mate?" Jason continued on in the background. "I mean, you bastard. Why did you need to do this to me? I never did a thing wrong to you," I thought to myself. The need to avenge my unfair beating ran through my blood. I'd never pretended to be a hard man, but I'd grown up knowing that sticking up for yourself was the bare minimum a man should do. Maybe it was a bit late for that, and revenge was just revenge, but I was angry. I didn't deserve this. Coupled with the guilt that was creeping into me about not helping Sarah, a woman who had let me into her home and then cared for me when I needed it, I made a decision, overruling the previous decision I'd made. Of course, I'd still be catching the flight later that day, and it'd still be a secret, but the least I could do was to help Sarah get her money back, now that I knew how much of a shit Amin really was. "What time did you say he goes to the gym?" I asked. "Around 8 or 9, she answered, a slight smile appearing across her face. "It depends on what time he gets up." I looked over to Jason, who sported that cheesy grin so effortlessly across his face, even at stupid o'clock in the morning after working all night. "So you're ready for this?" I asked. Jason crossed his arms and puffed out his chest, displaying his manliness, if that's your thing. "I was born to do this shit," he said, "but why wait until he goes out? He needs teaching a fucking lesson if you ask me." "Nobody's asking you, Jason," interjected Sarah. "All I want is my money and him out of my life." Sarah finished dealing with me and packed away her medical kit, then took it back to the kitchen. "I'm going to go get changed, get ready, and we're going to do this shit," said Jason, the violence already in his voice. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was born to do this shit. I put the rest of my clothes on and laced up my trainers tight because I thought that maybe I'll be running away from someone at some point. Flip-flops are a definite no-no that morning. I walked into the kitchen and stood beside Sarah as she poured a generous glass of whiskey. "It's a bit early for that, isn't it?" I asked. "Actually, it's for you, James," she said. "I thought it might help with the pain." She was probably right, and to be honest, I imagine it would have helped with the nerves as well. I feared the worst about Amin being there with his friends and all sorts of shit kicking off. "Not for me," I said. "I'm on a bit of a detox." "Good for you," she said, before drinking half of it herself. Apparently I wasn't the only one nervous. She told me she wouldn't have asked me if there was any other way, if there was anyone else she could have turned to, and she said that sending Jason in on his own would have been a bad idea, which I didn't disagree with. I told her it was fine, admitted that I owed her for helping me, that I was sorry for not agreeing to help at the first instance, and that breaking into a gangster's apartment to steal money from him was the least I could do. Always try and inject a little humour into your life. We'd shared a bit of a rollercoaster ride over the last couple of days, between the sex, her shouting at me, asking for help with me rejecting her cleaning my wounds, and then me finally deciding to help her. As we stood next to each other, she finished the whiskey, and I felt pleased that I wasn't going to let her down. It seemed that Amin had done enough of that already, and aside from her infidelity with me, she had been a great girlfriend to him, from what I'd seen anyway. "This shouldn't take too long," I said. "Will you still be here when we get back? I have to oversee a delivery at the bar, but it isn't a biggie," she replied. She picked up a set of keys from the kitchen counter, a set that I hadn't seen before, and dropped them in my hand. At least, technically, it wouldn't be breaking into Amin's place. Jason still hadn't appeared, so as Sarah went back to her room, I sat back down in the living room. Lowering myself into the seating position, I was having second thoughts about having a whiskey, maybe taking the edge off things, as the painkillers either weren't strong enough or hadn't kicked in fully just yet. My body was accustomed to Class A illegal shit. This over-the-counter medicine didn't seem to cut it. Just as I was growing weak-willed enough to drag myself up and into the kitchen to get the whiskey bottle, Jason walked into the front room and all my pain just disappeared in an instant. I put it down to the endorphins released throughout my body from the sheer joy I got from seeing how Jason was dressed. He stood before me in army-style khaki combat trousers, matching top and baseball cap. He even had shiny black boots, Doc Martens or similar, and he looked like he was ready for war. "Fuck me, Jace, you've been preparing for this for a little while," I asked, laughing on the inside, but a little worried too, as this young man stood in front of me clearly had issues. "Bought it yesterday before work," he said. "Fucking nice, eh?" "Yeah, it looks good," I replied, seeing him cast an eye on my casual wear and feeling somewhat underdressed. He held up what seemed to be the heavy end of a pool cue and some cable ties. Jesus Christ, help me now, I thought. Not a believer all of a sudden, more of a hoper. "Let's do it," said Jason. Chapter 22. Best Made Plans. It was about a 15-minute walk to Amin's apparently. Not that I'd ever been there, and in my current state, moving as slowly as I was, 15 minutes in Jason's head was probably a lot further than 15 minutes on my bruised legs. It did give me the chance to re-clarify what my plan was for that day, which went, get Sarah's money, go home, get my money from last night's drug sales, wait for the opportunity to sneak out, go. The day didn't have to be long or difficult. On the contrary, if Amin was out, as was assumed and hoped, then things were going to run smoothly, as long as the money was where Sarah said it was, and he hadn't moved it or spent it, which would have been too bad but not my problem. But that all relied heavily on Amin being at the gym or anywhere else but home, and Jason's eagerness to get this done, to put right what his great nemesis had done to that woman he adored, meant we were getting to his apartment earlier than made me comfortable. "Slow down a bit, mate," I said. "I'm not in top form at the minute." He turned back to me, gestured for me to get a move on, and carried on walking at the same speed as before, clearly not fussed if I didn't make it there at all. "Did you notice Sarah being short with me back there?" he asked. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I couldn't remember the last time she wasn't short with him. I knew that Jason probably now thought he had a chance with Sarah, now that she was very much single and probably a little fragile, maybe even needy. Always a great time to pick up a woman, and good luck to him. I'd be happy for them both if I were to find out that was the case. Not that I had any intention of leaving them a way of letting me know. We arrived outside Amin's apartment block and stood across the road. Jason was working himself up as I looked up and down the road for Amin's car. It wasn't there, but that didn't mean a thing. Parking was always a nightmare in central Marbella. The roads were packed, and with no allocated parking on this road, it must have been a bit of a free-for-all. From where we stood, even if a light was on inside his apartment, we'd not be able to see it, what with our line of sight, and also the reflection of the bright sky on the glass that far up the building didn't help. "Let's go," said Jason, and headed off towards the apartment block, Sarah's set of keys in his hand. Reluctantly, I followed. Climbing the 2 floors wasn't easy for my aching legs, ribs, arms, neck and face, but I could feel the adrenaline slowly produce and make its way through my body. I was shaking a little, but fully alert. This guy had gotten me beaten up last night, so even if he was there, I told myself that maybe he did deserve a slap or two, which would be coming from Jason, of course. I stood back as Jace peeped in through the window and then put his ear up against the door and then listened for a moment before shaking his head at me and pushing the key into the front door. The key didn't work, and then it got jammed in there. It took a good wiggle to get the key back out. This made a noise, and I was close to making a noise of my own in the back of my pants. He tried another key, and slowly, quietly, opened the door. He sidestepped inside through a narrow opening, and for a split second, I thought about walking away and leaving him to it, but he looked back out at me and gestured for me to follow him in. "Please, please, please don't be home," I begged Amin through power of thought. We tiptoed our way through his apartment, checking each room for the owner as we passed them. The kitchen was empty, then a small bedroom that was empty too, and a bathroom, also empty. There was one room left, the only room hidden by a closed door. A closed door, I thought. Surely that means he's in there. He's tucked up in bed, maybe alone, maybe with someone else. Maybe Amin and his new girlfriend are in the middle of making sweet, sweet love, and me and Commando Jason are about to interrupt and demand the money. I felt like I was in a film. A good film, maybe. Maybe the sort of film I'd like to watch, but certainly not a film I'd like to be based on parts of my life. I didn't want a character playing me to have to be in this scenario, because that would mean that I'd been in this situation, which is stupid. And I knew that as I watched Jason turn the handle on the bedroom door and push it open. There was no sex, no movement at all. It was just Amin, asleep, on his own. Jason made his way to the side of the bed and stood over the cocaine supplier. He pulled out his kosh and looked ready to pounce if Amin made any sudden movements. Then Jason nodded me towards the wardrobe, which I couldn't see at that point, as I hadn't been able to get my jelly legs to move my concrete feet through the bedroom door. I took a deep breath, promised myself to never get involved in anything like this again in my life, then took fairy steps towards the wardrobe at the far side of the bedroom. As I passed the bed, I noticed that Amin looked peaceful, and it didn't compute how he'd gotten those guys to beat me up the night before. It just didn't seem fair or just, but he was a drug dealer, and I guess I was just a junkie to him, even if I was a junkie who gave him chunks of cash every few days. I reached the wardrobe and took the small handle in my grip, turned to Jason, and he nodded back to the wardrobe door. "Open it," he said, quietly, but still too loud for my liking. Amin hadn't woken, so after wiping the sweat from my forehead, I gently opened the door and gave a sigh of relief when I saw the bag, just as Sarah had described, sat at the bottom of the wardrobe. It wasn't zipped shut, so I bent down and lifted up a corner of the opening. There were bundles of money in that bag, and for a moment I felt like our mission had been successful. Everything had gone to plan, except Amin being there, but he hadn't woken up and killed us yet, and he wouldn't either. A cracking sound forced me to turn around, and there I saw Jason bringing down the pool cue once again onto the head of Amin. And then he did it again, and again. My stomach began to convulse. I had to gulp heavily to stop vomit from flying up my throat, out of my mouth and covering everything in sight. He looked at me, explained Jason, an acceptable reason to him for smashing somebody's face in. I didn't know if Amin had woken or not. I didn't hear anything before Jason attacked him, but I understood that if Amin did wake up, there wasn't much choice for Jason but to be the first to make a move. It also didn't escape me that even if our Arabic drug-peddling, money-thieving enemy had opened his eyes and seen the excitable Aussie, he wouldn't have seen me, the timid Englishman, as he was facing the other way. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed the bag, zipped it up and made my way out of the bedroom, looking back at Jason, who still stood above Amin, breathing heavily, sweating and with a devilish look in his eyes. I glanced long enough at Amin to see his face covered in blood and a gap in his teeth that I'd never noticed before. Clearly Jason had played dentist and removed a couple of teeth just moments ago, and I could see his chest moving too. He was breathing, which was good, and he was pretty much unconscious as far as I could tell, which meant it was an ideal time to leave. I waved a hand at Jace, beckoning him to come with me. "It's all there?" he asked, pointing at the bag. I nodded, refusing to talk in case Amin could still hear and then would know who was with Jason for sure, as if he would need evidence to convince himself that Dumb and Dumber wouldn't be working together on this one. "I reckon he must have some Charlie here," Jason continued, looking smug as if that was a good idea right now. He prodded Amin in the face with his kosh. "You got some Charlie, mate?" he asked him. "You got some fucking powder?" Crack. Thump. Twice more he brought that pool cue down on Amin's jaw. I've watched a few boxing bouts in my time, and I've seen professional fighters go wobbly at the knees from less force on their chins than that. Amin was undoubtedly unconscious now, but at that point, Jason was the one I feared more. He had dribble coming from his mouth, like a rabid dog. His eyes were bulging, and he had a throbbing vein ready to explode on the side of his sweaty forehead. "Fuck this, Jace. Come on, for fuck's sake. I'll meet you downstairs." And with that, I left him to it. If he wanted to find some coke that badly, he could do it on his own. If Amin was going to wake up, or if any of his friends knocked on the door, I didn't want to be there. I peeked out from behind the front door, saw that nobody was coming or going along the corridor, and then stepped outside, closed the door, and calmed myself down as I headed towards the stairwell. I went down the steps, out of the main door and about 50 metres along the road, as fast as I could with my damaged body, until I came across a bench to sit on. There I waited, with the sun rising up from behind the clouds and gifting me warmth. I closed my eyes, counted to 100, and slowly brought my heart rate down to a normal level. My nerves were settling, and the job was done, for my part anyway. Jason was taking his time, being a greedy bastard. Maybe by taking a coke as well, he was showing Amin that the tables had turned, and that he would no longer be playing the victim anymore, that it was his turn to be numero uno. It was coming to the end of the season, and in theory, Jason wouldn't need Amin in the future. He had all winter to source another drug dealer if he wanted to carry on next year. Also, if Jason really wanted Sarah to take notice of him, to see him as the main man, in the way that he understood she looked up to and adored Amin, then maybe he was taking this opportunity to do just that, like alpha males fighting over turf and women. Chapter 23. Alpha Males. Amin's apartment was now a complete mess. Jason had gone through drawers and cupboards, tipped over plant pots, and finally found some cocaine at the back of the freezer. He held the cool bag of Charlie in his hand and weighed it up in his mind. About an ounce, he thought to himself, before opening it up and taking a sniff. The petrol and chemical substances made his tummy go. He felt a movement and some bubbling, and although even Jason knew that taking time out to dump his load in his victim's house was not a good idea, when you need a coke poo, you need to go sharpish. He sat on the toilet, and within moments, his bowels had emptied. He was so relieved that he didn't notice the sounds of someone regaining consciousness in the master bedroom. Without washing his hands, the Australian was on a mission and went back to the kitchen, cleared the work surface with one swipe of his arm and picked up the bag of powder, then poured out a few grams. He brought his hands together around the coke, making it into a manageable pile, and then leant down, stuck his nose into it and inhaled sharply through both nostrils. Half the pile had gone, and as Jason stood up straight, he felt his jaw and both fists tighten as the rush of chemicals his body produced in response to the cocaine ran through him. He grinned, even giggled a bit as he reached into his pockets, searching for his cigarettes, and then cursed as he couldn't find them. He must have left them at home. He looked about the kitchen to see if Amin had left the packet lying around, but before he found any smokes, His eyes came across something potentially more dangerous than cancer sticks. He moved towards the large kitchen knife that lay on the draining board, shining in the sunlight that was breaking in through the kitchen window. He took it in his hand, brought it close to his face, inspected the blade and smiled. Only Jason knows how his mind works, but anyone who had spent time with him knew that the thoughts he had running through his head when holding a knife like that, with someone he hated just a few steps away from him, were not thoughts that a normal person would have. His smile stretched into a large grin. The proverbial light bulb glowed above his head. He'd had an idea. The grin disappeared as he stepped briskly towards the bedroom, knife in hand, and with a look as hard as steel on his face he marched up to the bed. But then not only high, he was also confused. He turned around as he heard the sound of metal on metal. Click. Jason stood facing a battered Amin, standing before him with a cocked revolver pointing at his face. Shit, said Jason, so half the coke, he probably didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. It was Amin's turn to smile, albeit through broken teeth. Lose the knife, he ordered. Jason laughed as he tossed it onto the far side of the bed, then crouched down onto his knees and faced the wall, as instructed by the man with the gun. You thought you'd get away with this, barked Amin. Come into my house, fucking my woman. You've been fucking my woman. Jason squealed in pain as Amin landed an almighty kick to his privates. His head crashed against the wall from the force, and he thought his testicles had moved from his scrotum all the way up to his stomach. And you take my money, he continued. Where's my money? That English fuck has my money. Crack. Another heavy kick, this time to Jason's ribs, that sent him sprawling onto his side. He was in agony and fighting to breathe. Amin picked Jason up by the scruff of the neck and tossed him onto the bed. He then climbed on top of the Aussie and yanked his arms behind his back, planted his knee on both of them with his full weight, pinning them down onto the spot and almost snapping their spine at the same time. You come to my house, he yelled. You come to fuck me over, huh? You want to fuck me over? You want to fuck me? Amin yanked at Jason's cargo pants and pulled them and his underwear down. He screamed into Jason's ear, spit dribbling from his mouth. He pushed the gun forcefully into the side of Jason's head. Somewhere under his hair you'd be able to find the perfect imprint of the tip of the barrel of a .38 Smith & Wesson handgun. I'll show you how to really fuck someone over, Amin continued. He grabbed Jason's throat, squeezed and pulled it up, leaning down on his knee. Jason was beginning to realise how helpless he was, and then things got worse. Amin then rammed the 6-shooter into Jason's arsehole, tearing it and ripping the skin as it entered him. Jason tried to scream, but couldn't. The grip around his neck hardly allowed air through, let alone cries for help. You'll regret the day you fucked with me, you little bitch, whispered Amin, almost calmly, as he worked the gun in and out of Jason's body. You like that, huh? You faggot? You like that, you little fucking faggot? As most people would at this point, Jason thought it was over, that there was no way out. He'd have maybe even thought about me and the fact that I'd never come back to see why it was taking so long. And he may have been right. But then he had a touch of luck. The knife, it was on the bed and he could see it. The pain and humiliation suddenly fell silent in his head, and he focused on that knife, sat a couple of feet away from him. He could see the blade still shining, even in the dimly lit bedroom. Maybe it was the glow of an angel offering the knife back to Jason. Save yourself. You like that, continued Amin, enjoying his actions more by the second. You like that, little bitch, little faggot. Jason wasn't scared anymore. He ignored the pain. It was time. Yeah, Jason shouted. Give me some more, you gay fuck. Amin was a little shocked by Jason's words, taken aback, and that was the fraction of a second that Jason needed to make his move. With all his might, using the energy that remained in his drug-fueled yet abused body, he freed an arm and grabbed back at the gun, pulling it out of his behind and pushing it away from him and into the mattress, at the same time forcing himself along the bed with his legs as Amin struggled to contain him whilst concentrating on overpowering the hand that Jason had on the barrel of the gun. In the commotion, Amin sat down on Jason's back, but allowed him to wriggle free his other arm. Amin now concentrated on keeping the gun away from himself and wrapped his free arm around Jason's throat, squeezing as hard as he could. But the table had turned again. Jason had the knife in his hand and stabbed blindly and frantically at the man who straddled him from behind. Jason felt and heard the knife make contact. He felt Amin grow weaker yet heavier on his back, and then he felt the blood flow faster and faster down onto the back of his head and his neck. Amin stopped struggling, he stopped moving, and then he stopped breathing. Jason took a few moments to regain his breath, then rolled Amin off his back and got to his feet. He looked at the Arab, dead on the bed, and then at the knife covered in blood. He smiled. He would keep the knife that saved his life. He wouldn't even clean it. The blood would remind him how valuable it was to him. but he'd leave the gun. There were some things that he would never want reminding of. He put the knife in his pocket and went to the bathroom to clean up, rinsed the blood off his top and out of his hair. Back in the kitchen, he sealed the bag of powder and stuck it into his pocket, before shaping the remaining coke on the work surface into something that resembled the line, and with a few attempts sniffed it all up. Nearly 20 minutes had passed and Jason still hadn't shown his face outside. It was making me nervous again. I stood up, ready to say fuck it and leave Jason to it, but then I saw him leave the block of apartments and walk in my direction. "What took you so long?" I asked. "I found the Charlie," he said, tapping his pocket and wiping his nose. "You were ages," I said, as I started walking alongside him, bag over my shoulder. "Did Amin wake up?" "Yeah, he did," he said. I stopped, and then Jason stopped and turned back to me. "Don't worry, you pussy," he said, pulling out a few of the cable ties from one of his many pockets. "He's all tied up." "Jesus Christ," I said, under my breath. We carried on walking home, happy that the job was done, with occasional thoughts running through my head that I tried my hardest not to think about. I didn't know how Jason was so unconcerned about Amin catching up with him at a later date, even that very day. But then, as long as I was gone, I wasn't too bothered about it. Jason could look after himself, and even if he couldn't, I didn't care. Maybe Jace even had plans of his own, to leave or whatever. I just didn't want to know.
Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thank you.